What's up, my producer friends? Another monster here, anothermonsterproductions.com. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm actually starting a short series, and this is an introduction into sound design and synthesis. So I've created a couple questions, which I'm going to put on the screen now. And if you guys want to pause this video and take a look at these questions, and this is what we're going to be learning about throughout the series. If you're able to answer all these questions already, then you probably should not watch this video. If not, and you want to learn about this stuff, then continue watching and we're going to dive right in. So the first thing that I want to talk about on here are some different wave shapes. And so I have my 3X oscillator here, which is a native FL Studio plugin. We're not going to be learning how to use this plugin. We're just looking at these four waveforms right here. These are our basic wave shapes or waveforms, and we're going to take a listen and a look at them and talk a little bit about them. So basically we have our sine wave, which I've just highlighted here, which looks like that. And our sine wave is probably our most common wave that we're going to see over and over again. It is basically a note with no added harmonics onto it. Now, when we play a note, we call one up and down a cycle, and depending on how fast that's resonating determines the pitch of something. So the faster it's resonating, the higher the pitch of the sound. And we measure that in frequency, which you can kind of see on this chart here. So common frequency spectrum would be 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. And it's sort of understood that around pretty much below 40 hertz is not really actually going to be distinguishable. It's just sort of felt. And some people will argue that it's just taking up headroom at that point and that you may just want to get rid of some of those frequencies anyway. I'm kind of getting a little bit off topic here, but so let's try and reel it back in. Basically, we have our sine wave shape or waveform here. Looks like that, sounds like this. So as I mentioned, it is a single note with no added harmonics, as you can see on our chart here. And basically, sine waves are actually really great waves for sub bass. So what we can do is we can just lower this a couple octaves and then play the same note. And now we have a nice, rich sub bass tone, as you can kind of see here and probably hear, depending on what speakers you're listening on. So let me bring this back up. Basically, our sine wave is the only waveform that is not going to have other harmonics added on top of it. Any other wave is just different levels of harmonics added on top of it, which is creating this wave shape. So the next wave I want to talk about is our square wave. Our square wave looks and sounds like this. And as you can see, it just has all these harmonics added on top of it, which is giving it both the shape and the sound. So believe it or not, our square wave could also be used as a sub bass if we brought it down a couple octaves. It's basically just going to have like a dirtier, grittier, almost distorted sub bass sound. So let's take a listen. So that can actually be kind of cool depending on what genre you're going for. You may want to experiment with this type of thing. Of course, you could also potentially use a sine wave and add distortion on it, or saturation or something like that. Any sort of plugin which is adding harmonics onto it. Now, the next wave that I want to talk about is our triangle wave. Let me bring this back up. Our triangle wave is probably the most similar to the sine wave in look and sound. So let's take a listen. So as you can see, we have our initial sine wave and then also some added harmonics, but it's not nearly as many. So this is actually sort of my go-to, other than the sine wave, if I wanted to just real quick make a sub bass with a little bit of added harmonics, but not going too crazy. So it sounds like this. So that can be something that you guys want to potentially play with. The next wave that we're going to be talking about, and the final wave, is our Sawtooth, which looks and sounds like, actually, let me bring this back up. Looks like this, sounds like this. So our Sawtooth has the most harmonics added onto it. And if we bring it down a couple octaves, it sounds like this. So even though we're getting all this sub frequency down here, it's not really translating the same way as the other waves did, where we get that bass tone in the same way. So our Sawtooth is actually sort of the foundation for a lot of EDM sounds that you guys can potentially be making, and we'll talk more about that as the series continues. All right, guys, so the next thing I want to talk about are some common components that we're going to see within synthesizers. And by the way, we're going to be talking about strictly software synthesizers or soft synths in this series. And what I've got here is I've got Serum loaded up. Again, we're not focused on how to use this plugin right now. I'm just going to show you some components of it that are pretty universal across the board when it comes to synths. So the first thing I want to talk about is our oscillators. And basically an oscillator within a synthesizer is what is actually generating the sound. So you could think of an oscillator as, let's say we were any stringed instrument. If you were to pluck the string of an instrument, it oscillates back and forth to create sound. So similar to that, that's what synthesizers are doing as well. So that's hopefully kind of a visual representation of how you guys can think about what an oscillator inside of a synth is actually doing. All right, so the next common component that you'll find in most synths are filters. And I'm sure most of you have by this point learned about EQ, aka equalization. But with equalization, what we're doing is we are filtering out various frequencies or adding them in to shape a sound. And that's exactly what we're doing with filters when we're using them for sound design within a synth as well. So I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with these filter shapes, but I just want to touch on them real quick for those of you who aren't. And basically, I want to talk about 4 common shapes that we're going to run into. When it comes to Serum and some other massive other wavetable synths, and just synthesizers in general, generally there are going to be many more filter types than what we're talking about in today's video. And I urge you to sort of explore those on your own. But the 4 that I want to talk about today are our low pass filter, aka high cut, our high pass filter, aka low cut, and then our band pass and our notch filter. So our low, we're on this now. Let me just enable this filter. This is what it looks like. Basically, we're cutting out all this high frequency information here, and we have it here. Let me unmute it just so you can hear. I hope you guys remember what this waveform is called. This is our Sawtooth wave. Sounds like this. So if we filter it, now we have cut out some of that higher information there. And I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but just for the sake of having a little fun, let's take this LFO1 and we'll put it on our cutoff, which our cutoff basically controls how much we're cutting out, how many frequencies we're cutting out. So we could go all the way this way where we're cutting out no frequencies, or all the way this way where we're cutting out most of the frequencies. And now we can, let's just kind of put it here. So now we're able to actually get some cool sounds out of this. So I don't want to get too carried away with this. The next filter type that we're going to be looking at is our high pass, which, let's click this one. It looks like this and sounds like this. So again, we're getting rid of these lower frequencies and only letting the high frequencies pass through. So our band pass looks like this. Let me put this in the middle. Basically, we're getting rid of some of the higher frequencies and some of the lower frequencies, and we're only allowing these middle frequencies to come through, which sounds like this. And then the last one that I want to talk about is our notch filter, which basically we are just taking a notch out of the middle of this, and of course we can move the cutoff to control where that is, just like the other ones. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about are envelopes. Now our envelopes control attack, decay, sustain, and release, also known as ADSR. And depending on what synth you're using, you may run into some other knobs that will control various other things. Like, for example, we have a hold knob here. We're not going to worry about that for this tutorial. So basically, our attack controls how fast a note comes in when I hit the keyboard, or when it's played, whatever the case may be. So if I were to move this back, then it basically comes in slower. And depending on what synth you're using, you may be able to shape the wave if you have a sort of a graph here as well, which is kind of cool. Anyway, it's enough of that. Our decay is going to control what happens after we hit the note. So we actually are going to have to change the sustain. So the sustain right now is set all the way up, which is this little bar here. The cool thing about the synth is it gives us a visual representation of what's happening. So as I bring this down, that bar comes down, and this is how we would sort of create a pluck sound. And then the decay controls how fast the note decays. And then the release controls what happens after I let the note go. So whether or not it stops right away or if it continues to ring out. So what I'm going to do is just hit the note real quick and we'll see what happens. So it continues to ring out for a little bit longer, and we can set this way up. Okay, so the last thing that I want to talk about are LFOs. And LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, which when we're talking about low frequencies, we're talking about probably like below 20 hertz. And we can, again, have sort of, well, in the case of Serum, we have complete control over whatever wave shape we want this to be doing. Right now we have our triangle wave. And as we sort of heard before, I was able to link it to our filter. And I just linked it to the cutoff here and was able to control that with our LFO. So potentially we could choose different shapes. Let's see if we were to just do like a sine wave, or well, let's try and do like a square wave. So obviously not really as cool because it's just a basic saw wave. But anyway, you get the idea. We can just sort of play with potential different waveforms and then link them to various parameters within our synth to begin some actual modulation and doing some pretty cool stuff within your synths. All right, guys, so before I wrap up this video, I just wanted to give you all a little bonus and talk a lot about harmonics in a little bit more depth. So when we think about any live instrument, whether it be a piano, a violin, a flute, a trumpet, a guitar, it doesn't matter the instrument. Every instrument, when you play a note, is going to have a specific set of harmonics that go along with that sound. And how we describe that sound is timbre. I'm sure you've probably come across this term where timbre is sort of the makeup of the way something sounds, and harmonics is actually what controls that. So when we hear a guitar playing, the amount of harmonics, like if we were to pluck one string and one note, we would hear it as one note, but there's actually all these other harmonics added, which are giving it the timbre, which makes our brains actually able to distinguish that it's a guitar playing. So I hope that makes sense. And as an example, I'm going to play just a C note on this FL keys. So you can kind of see the harmonic makeup of what's going on as I press that C note. And all these harmonics is basically what's allowing us to hear it as a piano. So it's the same thing when we're using a sine wave. Well, obviously a sine wave is a single note, but if we're doing any other waveform, and on and on and on, triangle, square, sawtooth, all of these have their own unique harmonic makeup, which is basically creating that specific timbre or tone that we're hearing. Alright guys, that's all I wanted to cover in today's video. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked it, please go ahead, hit that like button. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. Don't forget to hit the bell notification because that's going to let you know every time I do release new videos like this one. I should be releasing the next video in this series probably next Tuesday, so keep an eye out for that. Also, I just wanted to say I appreciate each and every one of you who took the time to show interest in this series and give me your thoughts and feedback about what to sort of include in this series. I am making this for you guys. I do have one small favor to ask of you, and that is that right now, before you forget, go ahead, hit the share button on this video and share this with one of your producer friends who you think would really like checking out the video. Thanks so much for doing that for me, guys, and I will see you in the next one.